Part two of advanced web programming, and we're going to start looking at the Express generator, which is a tool we're going to use to make our lives easier moving forward. So if we kind of check out what the instructions are, we'll look in a minute. So the first thing we're going to do in a minute, because we want to use this tool regularly, we're going to install it globally. So there's an NPM package called Express Generator. So that will allow us to use Express to build new sites, and it will set up this whole directory structure. Great. So we'll install this globally, and then to create a new application using the Express generator, all we are going to do is run the command express and then the name of some new application. So we'll create a lesson 4, and then we'll just go into that application and run npm install, because it reads the package.json and will install all the dependencies that we need. So we're going to do this in a minute. So the first thing we'll do is add our lesson 4 command prompt. Let's run this command exactly. npm install express-generator -g. We want this to be global, so we'll never have to install the generator again. npm install, again, you can see the command on the left. Express generator -g. So let's run that command. I already have it installed globally. It doesn't matter. npm will just install over top. Maybe I'm getting a new version than what I've installed in the fall. So this will install to our roaming npm folder. Same place our nodemon global install lives. So inside of my user directory, app data roaming npm. So now I want to create a new application. So the generator actually builds a folder for us. So I don't first have to create a lesson 4 part 2 folder. The generator will build it for us. So I'll run the command express lesson 4 part 2. And here's an important point. At the end, I want -e. We can actually see what that -e does right here. If we don't specify -e, the HTML templating engine that the generator will use is Jade. And as I said earlier, Jade's kind of cool, but it's also easy to break our Jade templates. We want to work with EJS instead. So the E stands for EJS. So we can either type -e or -EJS, because that's specifying this is the type of HTML template engine we want to use. So express space lesson 4 -part 2 -e. So this is going to build a website that we can run. So just hit enter, and here's everything that got created. A lesson 4 part 2 folder, package.json, app.js, and all these subfolders. So these folders should be pretty obvious what they do. Public JavaScript, public style sheets. It creates a roots subfolder. We'll talk about this. And it creates a views subfolder. Also creates a public images folder, and then a couple of other folders. So if I go back to my Windows directory and go into lesson 4, we now have this lesson 4 part 2 folder that the generator built. And it creates all that stuff inside. So we've got a scaffold or a skeleton of an application. So now I'm going to I want to open up this folder in the code editor, but we have to do two more commands if we follow along with the instructions. So first it said use Express to generate your application with any options. So that's step 1, we've done that. So step 2 is we want to go into that new folder, and then we want to run npm install. So it will add all the packages that are listed in package.json. So it even shows us the command right here. So we'll do cd lesson 4 -part 2. And now we're inside our new folder. And now we just want to run the command npm install. Because if we look right now, we have no node modules folder, right? There's no dependencies attached. As soon as I run npm install, anything that's listed in package.json is going to get downloaded from npm, as well as any dependencies those packages have. And we can actually, we'll take a look and see how big is that node modules folder. When we set up with the generator, what's kind of our starting point? How big is this? Because we may be like Joel, where something's eating up our hard drive space, and we got to be mindful of that. Okay. So notice node modules is now created. If we have a look, the generator gives us, not too much, 1.6 megs worth of dependencies that come with it. So now I'll close this and I'm gonna open up my lesson 4 part 2 folder instead. So we don't need our little part 1 example anymore. We're done with that. So let's open up our part 2. And we can have a look at exactly what the generator did. We saw that it gave us a bunch of folders. So there's our package.json. So you can see those are the top level dependencies that we're using. You'll notice this file, this start file, we don't really need to worry about this. This bin www is kind of a startup configuration file. And Preet, I want to come back to your question about the port. So here's when we use the generator. If a particular port is specified on the server, use that port, otherwise default to 3000. So that's built in when we use the generator. We don't have to touch this file. Here's our app.js, a whole bunch of dependencies. Okay, so things reading body parser, that's so we can process form posts. Cookies should be self-explanatory. Obviously, Express. We're instantiating a new Express application like we've already done in our Hello World and like we did last week. It sets up that EJS is the view engine. We're using EJS files for our HTML views. It does logging. It sets up a static directory called public. So this is where we put all of our, what are known as assets. So they're not code files, they're all the front-end files like front-end JavaScript, CSS, and images. So it already sets up paths and even gives us a little default style sheet for starters that we can keep, we can add to, we can change, we can do whatever we want with this. Later on, we're gonna add Bootstrap, but we can use both Bootstrap as well as override some things in Bootstrap with our own CSS. So it's all set up for us. Any images we want, we just put them in the public images folder. Seems simple. And we're going to install Jquery, so we probably want that to go in our public JavaScripts because that's our client side, our front-end JavaScript. Now, we've also got this app use. So now we're starting to use a real MVC pattern here. So our app is like our global kind of site configuration file. It bootstraps or launches the application. So let's look at what this does. app.use/. So when we get requests at the root URL, go to index. Well, where's index defined? So index is a reference to this file here, routes index. So Express uses a little slightly different terminology. We usually use the term MVC, model view controller. In Express, they don't use the term controller for the logic. They use the term routes instead. I don't know why. So these two files, these are our controllers, our logic files. So whenever a request comes in at /star, the routing for it is done in the routes index file. Whenever we get any requests that start with the URL /users, it's directed to a user's controller. So let's have a look at what these look like. So we've introduced one more express object here, which is an express router. This is how Express will map, dispatch, and handle the URLs. So if we have a GET request at /star, we're going to load the HTML view called index. Where do we find it? Right here. It actually gives us a default homepage. So there's what it looks like. This is what our EJS views look like. Looks fairly similar to a PHP page, doesn't it? Right? We've got mostly static HTML, and we've got a few server-side values that are delimited by that. Those are our server-side EJS tags. And this equals command, what do you think this does? Yeah, it's the equivalent of a PHP echo command. It's outputting or displaying a variable. So in order to pass the value from the server to our HTML view, right? So notice what happens. We get a GET request. We're loading our view called index. We don't even have to specify a file type because our app.js says all our views are EJS. And we're passing in as a JSON object a variable called title. So in our view, it can render. We actually have 3 instances of that variable. So this is how we pass data from our controllers to our views. We render a view. So maybe this data is the result of a database query, right? So in our controller, maybe it's a URL like student/123. So in our controller, we're going to take that URL. We're going to go to the database. We're going to query student ID 123, and we get back our data as a JSON object. First name, last name, student number, program. We're going to render back any view, and then we'll pass back an object that has all of the properties and values. And then in our view, we can render any one of those values. So Express sets up this structure for us. And we had a question about 404. It's already actually set up here. App.use. So if we get this, we can handle it if we want. It's already kind of baked in. Same with other 500 errors. And then down at the bottom, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. We talked about this last week. What is happening here? What does that exports keyword do? Right, it makes this app global, so everything in our application can see everything in here. So we can actually run this now, and it's going to work in our browser, and we're going to get a web page. So all we need to do is we can run npm start, or we could just run nodemon to kick it off. So it's running. So by default, it'll run on port 3000. So now we should be able to hit localhost 3000. So I can just refresh this. So here's what the generator gives us right out of the box. Great, we have a working site. So there's 2 different requests that our generator site can handle. And this is one, just localhost 3000 in the root. The other one that's mapped, if we look at app.js, right, we can handle requests in the root, and we can handle requests that's users. So let's see what we get if we go to localhost 3000/users. Nope. So, okay, let's see what happens here. So we get this message, respond with a resource. So again, let's kind of trace the path. So our users variable points to our users route in roots. Our requests at localhost 3000/users get handled there. And if we open up users.js, here's what we get. Similar to index.js, right? Set up an express router, handle any GET requests at /star. Remember, already inside of users. And what do we send back in this case? Well, we send back in this case, we're just sending back a text message. So those two URLs are mapped. If we try going anywhere else, so those are the only two URLs that our application understands right now. Doesn't know what to do with anything else besides index and users. So as we want to create more pages, we need to do two things. We create a new view, and then we need to create a route handler in our application to map a particular URL to load that view. Now notice both of these are running GET requests. We might have two different requests at the same URL, right? Let's say we have a sign up form and we want to run at the URL domain/register. There's two ways that page could be loaded. When the user clicks the sign up link, we want to display the empty form to them, right? So what kind of request are we going to run in that case? We want to load that page, display the empty form. Yeah, we want a GET request to run. So we'll actually have two different route handlers at the same URL. Run that will be router.get, and then we'll display the form. What will the other route handler be like? We'll have router.post also at the same URL, and what will we do on the post handler? Yeah, we're going to want to take the form that's already been submitted, parse the data, and probably send that off to database. So we'll see multiple route handlers. So eventually what this will look like, just to show you, look something like this when we kind of move along, when we start building this out into an application that can do all of create, read, update, and delete. So here was one we did last semester. What did we build? So I'll show you what the completed route looks like. So my Friday section, so one of the things we're going to do today is figure out what our website's going to build. They wanted to build a liquor store. So that's what we build. Website so we could add, edit, delete, update, list of drinks. So here was the completed route file when we were done all our code. So we had a get at localhost/drinks. What's it doing here? Going to the database, fetching out all the data, and sending all this data back. So we could display that in an HTML table. So there was kind of like our drinks homepage. Now here you can see the exact example we're talking about. When we went to drink/add, we have two different handlers. The get simply displayed a blank form. The post was after the user submitted the form and posted it, we then would parse all the data from the body, save it to our database. So we had a get and a post at the same URL. And then we had two more gets. One, this should be pretty self-explanatory, what we're doing here. And same here. We had a get for editing, loading an existing drink onto the page so the user could modify it. And then when they posted that form back, we wanted to submit it, do an update. So this is where we're going. We're going to build a similar controller like this, and we'll add on pieces to it over the next bunch of weeks. So let's say we want to change something. We want to change our title. So right now our homepage says Express. Let's change this. Call it lesson 4. So we're inside of roots and index.js. We're going to load the same page. We're going to load our index.ejs view, but the value, the variable we're passing from the server to our HTML, we're just changing that variable. So if I go back and refresh, because NodeMon is running, my changes, so now it says lesson 4 everywhere. So we're passing one variable from our controller to our view, and our view is using those little server-side tags to display that value. What if we want to display, to send two variables from here to the view? How would we do it? Let's say we've got a title, but we also want to set a message and send the message to the view as well. What would we do here? Rutil, how would you do it?
Just like title, just do a comma.
Okay.
Message, send a colon. And
yep. So I'll make a message, colon.
whatever you want.
We're still loading the index view, but now we're passing it two values, both title and message. So we can display both of these values in our view. So whenever we want to send information from the server to the client, we just add it in as another variable in that JSON object. And then we can refer to any value by these names. So let's go back to our view. How would we display that message here? So we'll just use those little server-side tags. So now if we reload our page, we should see both the title and the message. These variables are case sensitive. So in my controller, if I'm passing variables that are lowercase, if I reference this one this way, you'll notice something right in my code editor. It went from purple and bold to black, which is an indicator, doesn't recognize that variable. That variable doesn't exist in the controller. If I try and run it this way, so your variables, any variable you try and reference in your HTML, that variable has to be declared in your controller, or we get this. Saying, we don't know what message with a capital M means. Yeah, we can do error handling in app. We can do global error handling in app.js. We can also do try catch within our controllers. For development purposes, we want things to crash, right? Because we want to see the error so we can fix them. Sure. So when I put it back, it shows as purple. So there was our index.js. So the values we're passing to the form, it's all in the same JSON object, but we just separate the individual values with a comma. So we have a couple of options in terms of how we create the controllers and where we map the URLs. We could map all of the URLs inside of index.js. We don't necessarily need another controller. In a big application, we probably don't want to do that. Why not? Why would we be best off to maybe divide the controllers into different sections? Let's say we were building Blackboard, right? What are all the data that Blackboard manages? What kinds of stuff does Blackboard manage? Courses, grades, calendar, students, right? If we are doing this in Node, we don't want to handle all of the URLs in one controller. That file, remember, it handles all the logic for the whole application. It'll get too massive. So what we'll probably do is make a student's controller. And all of the routes related to a student would go in there. We'd have an instructors controller, all of the routes related to instructors, add, edit, delete instructors, view instructor count, they go in there. For your lab and for your portfolio, you don't have to make other controllers because you only need 4 or 5 pages. So for a small site, it's fine that we handle all of the different routes in index.js. That's fine. So let's add a couple things pages we're gonna need later on. We won't make them functional today, but later on we're also gonna learn how do we log in, make this whole little application we're gonna build private. So let's build a register and login page and then add the URL routing so we can load, register, or log in. Now we can do this one of 2 ways. We can either build the HTML templates first and then add the route handling to index.js, or we could add the route mapping first and then add the HTML views second. Doesn't really matter which order we do it in. Let's maybe make the views first. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to make a new EJS file. Actually, you know what? How many of you are using WebStorm?
It's not coming up in the EJS file.
Yeah, I'm going to show you how you can add EJS and also how you can get it. Like if I make an HTML file, it will give me a whole bunch of default HTML. So I don't have to create the head section, the body, all that stuff will be in there. So we want to set it up to generate EJS files that also give us a template. So here's what we do. So right-click your project, choose New, and go into Edit File Templates. Okay, and you'll get this little window. So click on HTML5 and just copy all of this. So we want this as our template. So every time we create an EJS template, our code editor will automatically insert all those tags for us. So just copy that. Okay, then just use HTML. It's fine. If you just have this, although you'll want to take that stuff out. So if you just have this one, just take that stuff out. And then just highlight and copy it. So you have that template on your clipboard. And now if you click the plus sign here, click Create Template, call it EJS file, change the extension to EJS. And then you can paste in that HTML and click OK. So now when you click New File, EJS file will be one of the options. And if you choose it, it will automatically copy this HTML as a starter template for all of your EJS files. So we don't have to type this code ever. It will always be here. So I'm going to make 2 EJS files. I'll click a new EJS file. I'll call one register. I don't need to specify the extension because we've said the template already has an EJS extension. So notice it copies all that template for me. And I'll make another one called login. So 2 identical pages right now. We won't make these pages functional. We just want them to display in the browser at the right URLs. So all I'm going to do on them is put on a title and an H1 tag. So this one will say login, and in the body, I'll just put in an H1 that says login. That's it. Do the same thing with register. Give it a title of register, put on an H1 tag that says register. One thing at a time. We just want to create the pages and get them to write some route handlers and get them to load for starters. But there's no EJS code, there's no variables. These are just HTML pages right now. The reason we gave them the EJS extension is so we can inject PHP variables into them later, like a title. We'll come to that. So we have these two files, but they're not connected up to our URL handling right now. There's no way to load these files. If we try to go to localhost 3000/register, we're going to get a 404 error because our application doesn't understand that URL. We haven't provided any instruction what should happen. Okay. Is everybody okay with the EJS files? What's the problem?
I'm still behind on how to the Node.js thing.
Okay. Okay. Well, you may want to at least create the files and then you'll have them even if you can't run them. You may want to code along so at least you have a copy of the files and you have the code. Do I know anything about Atom? A little bit. Not off the top of my head. So now we want to go back to our root file, our index.js, and we want to set up two more get handlers, one for the URL/register and one for the URL/login. So we're going to use the express router to handle a get request at /register. And here we have our callback express expects these three parameters: request, response, and next. We can probably tell from the first, the auto-generated root handler, what code do we need here on line 15 that will load our register page. So we'll call res.render. And now we just specify the name of some view. So now Express knows what to do with a GET request at this URL. We're going to load register.ejs. You can put the file extension on, you don't have to. Why didn't we have to specify the path? Because register.ejs, it lives here, right? It lives in, whoops, I put it in the wrong place. I need to move both register and login. Those should go inside of views. I right-clicked and did new file from my root folder. I meant to do it inside of my views folder. So why don't I specify that that's views/register? You got it. Thank you. Remember, in our app.js, we are setting views to be in the view directory. So we don't have to specify it for every page. It knows that's the default place where all of our views will exist. So NodeMon should have restarted a bunch of times. So now if we hit /register, it interprets that URL, knows we did a GET request, and will load our register page. What will happen if we try our login at this point? Right. Why won't it work? You're right. You got it. We have the view set up, but there's no instruction that ever asks that view to be loaded. So just like we did a GET handler at the URL/register, we also need a GET for /login. with our same 3 callback params. Now nodemon should restart, and you should also be able to hit localhost 3000/login. So for your portfolio, you need 5 HTML views, and you need 5 root handlers in index.js that will map to /about, /contact, /project. So really what we've done, pretty much that's for the most part all you have to do for the portfolio. Then you have to actually flesh out and fill out your site, really. There's not much more code required than what we've already done. There's really only one other coding piece to it. So we have a little kind of 3-page site. We're going to set up one other page, okay? And this is where we need to have a quick poll, figure out quickly, as I said, what you guys want to build.